Hey guys, we are back and we are continuing on with our Unit 4 lecture, and we're going to start by talking about capillary puncture. So if you remember back in Unit 3, we did talk about capillary punctures just a bit when we were talking about obtaining a sample for hemoglobin study. So capillary puncture is the method of obtaining drops of blood, and for these capillary punctures, we obtain them in the site of the fingertip on adults. So usually the ring finger is selected, and it needs to be made at the tip of the pad of your fingertip and slightly to the side. Now in infants this is different. Remember they will have a heel stick. So instead of their fingertips, because their fingers are so tiny, they actually have the capillary puncture done in their heel. So we have to select areas carefully. We need to warm the sites to allow better blood return, as well as cleaning the areas thoroughly to make sure there's no bacteria that enters those sites. When we obtain a capillary puncture, it's also important to remember to always wipe away that first drop of blood. And this is because that first drop of blood will be contaminated with the alcohol that you've used, and we just want to get rid of any excess material that may be on the finger. So we wipe away that first drop of blood and get that second or third drop. That's going to give us that clear and the best sample that we can get. We also want to be sure we don't squeeze the fingertip because this can actually cause plasma and other blood products to exit that wound, and we want just the specific drop of blood, no extra plasma, nothing else extra to be forced out of that fingertip. Now that's not to say that we can't massage the finger gently, but no forceful squeezing to get that blood sample. So the reason we're talking about capillary puncture is because the reason we do capillary puncture most of the time in the physician office laboratory is to obtain a blood glucose. So glucose, if you'll remember from some of your previous science courses, is a source of energy. So it provides energy to our bodies. And sometimes, however, though, we can have too little or too much blood or glucose in our blood. And this often occurs due to you'll see DM here, and this stands for diabetes mellitus. So you can have hypoglycemia, which means low blood sugar, or hyperglycemia, which is high blood sugar due to diabetes. So some tests that we use to talk about blood glucose and to talk about our blood sugar, the most common one is going to be our fasting blood sugar. So a lot of times you won't even realize what they're doing, but they will be testing your blood sugar. It may be in a normal office visit. It may be during your annual physical that they obtain your blood, but they may prick your finger or obtain it through an actual phlebotomy blood draw. But what they're looking at is at a fasting level, so after you've fasted for a period of time, what your blood sugar is. And this normal fasting blood sugar range should be between 70 to 110 milligrams per deciliter. So 70 to 110. Now, if that value is over 120, this is the dividing point between healthy and hyperglycemia. Now, if someone forgets to fast, and I think I've shared this story in some of my classes, I went to an annual physical, I did not fast beforehand, and they obtained my blood, they would need to note this, because if I did just eat a meal high in sugar, my blood sugar may be well over that 120 mark. But in a fasting state, my body's blood sugar and all of our body's blood sugar should be between 70 and 110. Another test they may run is a 2-hour postprandial blood glucose. So what they're doing is looking at the blood sugar, and they're evaluating how well the insulin dosage may have worked. So some individuals with diabetes, specifically those with type 1 diabetes, have to take insulin because their body is unable or insufficient in producing insulin. So what they do is a patient will eat a meal and take their specific amount of insulin dosage, and then 2 hours after the meal begins, they will check that blood glucose using a capillary puncture. And in a healthy person, that glucose level will have returned to normal. And if the insulin dosage is sufficient, then that glucose level will have returned to normal as well. If that insulin level is, if that blood glucose level is elevated after that 2-hour mark, then we know that that insulin level may need to be adjusted. Another test you may hear about in regards to blood sugar or diabetes is our hemoglobin A1C. So our hemoglobin A1C is kind of a summary, and it tells us how well our average glucose has been in the past few months. So it's kind of giving us a more broad picture of how well you've been maintaining your blood sugar over a period of time. It cannot help us in adjusting any of our insulin, and it doesn't tell us if there have been any specific episodes of hyperglycemia or hypoglycemia. This is specifically just an average of our blood sugar. In this test, you do not have to fast. And for a normal individual, a hemoglobin of 5.7% without diabetes and 7.0% with diabetes. And then one other test that you may hear about is an oral glucose tolerance test. This test, you can think about if any of you all have been pregnant, you have been involved in this test. It's often used to diagnose gestational diabetes, but it can also be helpful in regular diabetes as well. So what happens in this test is that an individual will fast for 8 hours and then will be given a high glucose solution. So these are often like sugar water drinks, very, very sweet in nature. They do not taste great from experience. So at this point, you fasted for 8 hours, you drink this glucose solution. After that point, you can't have anything else to eat or drink. And then within 30 to 60 minutes, your glucose level is tested. So what happens in your body is that your blood sugar is going to peak around 30 to 60 minutes. So it's going to get up really, really high. And then they're going to keep testing your blood sugar to see if it has come down. So if your blood sugar goes up after you've drank this very sugary solution, and then they'll keep checking it to make sure that it returns to normal. And it should return to the fasting level after about 2 to 3 hours. With diabetes or gestational diabetes, you will still have an increased glucose level at the end of this test. So automated methods of glucose analysis. So when we perform this capillary puncture, we will be using a glucose analyzer, or sometimes referred to as a glucometer. There are many, many types of glucometers on the market, and you may have one that you use in the physician office laboratory. You may also be responsible for teaching individuals how to use their own glucometer at home as well. It is also important to note that you may be tasked with performing the controls on these instruments. And remember, there is a skills video specifically over how to do those glucose level controls on your glucometer. And then last but not least, I just want to remind you guys to watch these videos that I've included in the PowerPoints. They're great. They kind of expand on what I've talked about in these 2 videos. Remember to watch your skills videos, read over the chapters associated with this lecture, and if you guys have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to me.